Welcome to TezTalks Radio, the global Tezos ecosystem podcast hosted by Marissa True and Stu Elms. You're tuning into a special edition episode where we showcase some of the best conversations that took place at the Art Basel speaker series supported by Tezos. Enjoy.
Mic check. We're good.
Hello.
And mine is...
Guten Morgen, everyone. Welcome. My name is Johnny D. Mann. I'm your moderator today, and I won't be speaking too much, hopefully. I'm an artist and a writer, and I also edit a NFT magazine called The Tickle, which some of you hopefully may know. And today we're talking about the historical journey of art and technology, which we will cover in its entirety in 40 minutes. So I'm honored to be up on stage with the two artists today, Aleksandra Jovanic and Marcel Schwittlick. So firstly, Marcel Schwittlick is an artist living and working in Berlin, Germany, who is investigating the cybernetic aspects of generative art and modern technology, among other things, many other things. Aleksandra Jovanic is a researcher, a designer, and an artist working out of Serbia. She's investigating interactive art games, and generative art. Guys, would you like to elaborate a little bit, perhaps, on your brief introductions? Aleksandra.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. When you have to introduce yourself, that's always a tricky one. Mostly because I've changed directions in my previous, what I did in my. So basically, there's an anecdote of one of my professors always enjoyed driving in a taxi, and to ask cab driver what he was in his previous life, because no one chooses to become a cab driver. And now I remember that because I have few previous lives. So basically, for my education, I first graduated computer science, then did my master and PhD in digital art. So basically, I go by artist now, but I'm also a professor at the faculty, and I can't avoid being a coder or programming from time to time, so that's the shortest one.
And Marcel, please.
Yeah, like you say, it's difficult to, and that's also the interesting part about that you're kind of doing things which are not so easy to summarize. But yeah, sometimes I like putting it like that I'm working with computers. That's it. But I also have a software education, and also studied generative art in Berlin, and doing mixed things like writing software for art, but also making installations with dead computers, and kind of mixed stuff, but lots of programming also involved. Yeah.
Thanks, Marcel. Obviously, the title of the talk is "In Historical Journey of Art and Technology," which is quite a big question. So I think I'll perhaps start with just asking each of you to kind of detail not the overall arc of the genre itself, but maybe your personal experiences with it, with the art history, with the artists, and how that sort of influenced your art practice. Aleksandra, maybe?
So can we focus on generative art or in
generative
general?
art, yeah,
Yes.
Why not?
So we know that generative art can be traced long time ago, before computers. But also, since we are all working with computers, then this part of history, when we started using computers for generative art, is most important for us, or most interesting. So, from the beginning of digital art, there is always fascination with technology from artist side. whether artists are exploring technology or experimenting with technology, or they are working in collaboration with technical staff that help them develop their ideas with technology. And also, maybe for me, it's mostly interesting when artists themselves are exploring technology and finding something interesting in that field. Also, one of my interests was art and science, like direction in art, and what artists can bring to science field or here into technology, or how technologists or scientists are, I don't know, using some methodologies from art to work on in their field. So looking at this like history stuff, I'm always fascinated with the progress. Like at first, artists start exploring, experimenting, and then when they feel comfortable with the technology, then they develop their most valued pieces or most important pieces. And okay, since generative art exists in this like computer, generative art since the 60s, I think now we can say that we don't explore anymore, just we're using the technology in the right way, maybe.
Marcel?
Yeah. For me, like it was like as a late teenager or something like that, where I kind of found out about the possibility that you can do art with computers. Yeah, like, and before that I was doing whatever, like building websites, like having fun on the internet, doing you know what you can do, exploring that space, and it's kind of interesting to look at that. Generative art is one thing which that term doesn't exist for that super long, but you can kind of apply, or you can kind of recognize lots of patterns of what it is in everything if you want, yeah. But then you can kind of be more precise here and there about it, and it is super interesting to look at it from the idea that it's kind of like a bottom-up approach of creation, like what Aleksandra said, that it's kind of finding like a new technology around and really not having an idea what you are trying to express at first, and kind of just apply the tools, but more like seeing what there is and kind of being free and playing around, and things go the other way. And I think that's one paradigm that's also in the now classic generative art, is kind of one main idea about it, that you're kind of having the the phenomena of emergence from small little rules, bigger things, that then the sum of the parts are kind of happening. Yeah.
So you're playing God in a sense?
No.
Yeah, I don't feel like God, so I don't know.
You're God to me, Marcel. We were talking yesterday, kind of in broad terms, of how you define generative art. And Aleksandra, you mentioned kind of there were two broad kind of patterns: pre-computer and kind of post-computer, essentially. I just wonder if you want to talk perhaps a little bit about those distinctions and the kind of type of work, and the kind of the theory, I guess, behind it, the ideas behind it.
So last year, maybe more than a year ago, I was involved in a project that was called Algorithmic Art, and it was an educational program that combined math, programming, and arts, and it was aimed for the high school students. And then we were talking about what is algorithmic art, or what is generative art, and how to bring it closer to high school students. And then we had to combine it with most of the simplest processes or examples. So when you look at the algorithm, it exists long before computers. So if you look at in that way, so generative art or generative processes also exist for really, really long time. So every wherever you have some kind of instructions how to do something, whether it's design, making patterns, like design on arabesque or something like that, there is always some type of generative process in there. So also when we fast forward to contemporary art, then there are lots of influences to generative art or artists that were working on something that's close to algorithmic art, like making instructions to do something, and there are various types of art pieces that were developed in that way. So we were mentioning yesterday Sol LeWitt and his wall drawings, and so basically where the art becomes to that instructions or process how it will be made, so you will see what comes up after you follow the instructions. And then with the use of computers and starting using computers by larger population, so artists are always the first to use technology in some other way, not as it was intended. So basically, we came to this comfort zone where we can tell computers to do something for us, and then we get nice outputs, interesting outputs.
Yeah, and I think there's also like very different ways to look at that you can be making your computers do the systems, like completely virtual digital systems that are like a simulation, which is really, really great about, like, I guess the time that we are living, that we have these powerful, easy computers and easier accessible tool sets also to simulate these ideas. Like maybe, or like 30, 40 years ago, it was quite difficult for people to even create simple algorithmic ideas, or it really took, like dedication of years going at night into some faculties to use the computers, and yeah, I find that really interesting.
I guess it could be said that any technological breakthrough in art could be seen as cheating, in a sense, and particularly these accusations are levied at generative artists in many ways. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on kind of that notion of cheating and what kind of input the artist has on a project and how you see that as an artist, as artists. Marcel, maybe?
Yeah, cheating. You think about cheating in that sense that you can create something which doesn't exist, and you can make it happen, or you can bring it alive without using your body to kind of create the system, and like this you can kind of take shortcuts, and like, yeah, I guess kind of could depend on your perspective of what is real also, and yeah.
Well, I'm not embarrassed of that, like we're cheating. I loved one quote from Mirko Ilić. He's a world-known designer, and in few of his lectures, he always emphasized, like, I'm a lazy designer, so I like 3D, because I build models and then I can reproduce from there different designs. I'm just rendering the same model from different angles. So the computer is doing something that it would take me hours to draw all the sides from which you're seeing that model. So he says, like, honestly, I'm so lazy. I love 3D. So here I can compare it to that I love when I make the code and get millions of outputs, and they're all different. Get surprised by the outputs. Sometimes I think I wouldn't position elements in that order. I wouldn't think of that, or it would take me hours and hours to get to that phase, to make that composition. But computer does it for me, and I love it.
Yeah, I think that is this at this time this was completely groundbreaking to look at it like that. For me personally, like with the longer that I'm spending time in that field, I have the feeling I'm more and more going a little bit backwards in time with my own ways. Like like in the past I was like hyper digital, or like normal digital and current ways, and kind of going back, like getting more analog and kind of like feeling the process of actually executing a generative idea yourself, like kind of becoming the machine, and kind of, I'm not really sure where this is coming from, this tendency, but I think it has to do something with going, trying to understand the roots of all of this, and kind of learning and like learning with your own experiences how it must have been before we are in this time right now where things are maybe a little bit easier. And yeah, I kind of appreciate also what it takes to draw 1,000 frames by hand. Yeah.
So you're slightly ashamed of being a cheater, so you're rowing it back a little.
Yeah. I mean, like, I wouldn't say that for once. But it's like you have to kind of also feel, or like kind of respect the work that is being automated, I feel.
There was, speaking of analog work, you're perhaps most renowned for your series Upward Spiral, which when sold as an NFT on TezTalks, had to get that mention in. When sold as an NFT, you include the physical print, but not only that, but you include instructions, sort of almost like a sort of Sol Levitt kind of approach of who, if you sell it on secondary, whoever that might be, then you are required to send that analog drawing to the next purchaser. I just wondered if you were inspired by Sol Levitt in that sense, or thought it was a really interesting kind of, almost an algorithmic kind of process in itself. Yeah.
Less like directly inspired. I guess we are all quite inspired by Sol Levitt's work to some degree, and these it kind of came like that kind of naturally, like when for me it was kind of came on the plan that I could make NFTs, like when there was something happening on Tezos. It was for me the first time that all of the lights were green to try that technology out, and I was sitting there and thinking, okay, Marcel, you don't really do digital work anymore for some time now, but I still see it digital, but I'm kind of really interested on the process of involving your body and involving lots of time also. There was a bit the idea for me to slow things down and really find a way to spend as much time on one piece as possible. And if it would be staying in the virtual, conceptual, I would kind of move on too fast. And it's kind of the experiment of how can you kind of passively spend as much time possible on one work and kind of let chance or, let the process kind of bring the surprises, what is happening. So within that series, it was like a 2-year process of making these, and that was kind of generative because I didn't know what was going to happen in the future, or if there were all kind of exceptions and random noise in your life that is kind of has an impact on the work. And that was the idea to try this out. And these instructions, I think it was just necessary, because otherwise there would have been confusion and people were wondering what this is. And I tried to kind of project this into the future, how this is going to go, because I'm looking at this technology also as a very practical way, like as a tool of making sure that where is your work, and kind of making it possible for your collectors also to have a easier market to continue, and like have a context that it's not like the Alba's paintings or drawings that have difficulty to track where they are and stuff like that. And that's what I found really interesting about NFTs. And this was my kind of a test run for that technology, to see because if the tokens, kind of the receipts, are potentially not usable anymore in a couple of years, then it might be a little bit too short-lived. I'm not sure if that's the right term to say, but I'm kind of expecting this to be there indefinitely, and this was what was necessary to kind of wrap around the future and like give a little bit of a framing.
Yeah, you mentioned timescales there, and I think this project was a pandemic, kind of mid-pandemic sort of process, wasn't it? And I think it's strange because that kind of couple of years felt like about 10 years, and then the year since NFTs has felt like 10 years compressed into a year. And Aleksandra, you were speaking a few days ago about the nature of that kind of time and the pressure that's now kind of a bit more present in this kind of NFT world, I guess, in that there's a difference in the way you approach time in preparation for projects now, as opposed to previously. Obviously, you're an academic researcher, so the time spent and the care taken is huge. Can you talk a little bit perhaps about kind of the timescales of things now, as opposed to before?
I would also like to touch on this analog versus digital and how we combine them in our work. Also, and it goes with this question that you asked. So previously, because I've been doing art for a long time, doing exhibitions, working on large pieces, like solo exhibition, then I have plenty of pieces at one place, but they're all connected, they have one concept, and when I'm working on something like that, it takes time for research, for making the best output, to work best in the space where I'm exhibiting and stuff like that. So it works completely different from NFTs, and it also has something to do with pandemic, when we spent more time inside with the computer, and everything goes much faster on the internet. And when I started publishing, let's call it like that, my creative coding or generative art. I wasn't focused on NFTs, but I started making dailies, like doing something every day or trying to do more. So eventually I wasn't developing the idea for weeks or months and then doing something. I was actually just experimenting. And it became a habit of now doing something all the time, something new. So the speed at which I'm doing now is much faster than it was 3 years ago, for example.
Marcel, do you have a sort of similar tale to tell?
Yeah, it is a big change in speed. I'm not sure if I'm really a big fan of that.
You just start and you're not aware what you're doing.
Yeah, which is something, you know, that is also fine to let go to, and has also to do, I guess, with losing control a little bit, which is again, you know, a little bit of an aspect of the whole thing that we find is interesting in this type of art. Even though I would, you know, I think it's difficult to limit the term like that so often. Yeah, like I think we also agree on that. Yeah, you have. I think it's important to kind of call it art, and generative art is maybe just like one of your ways to think. It's just like a little bit of a mindset that naturally comes out with, you know, writing code. But yeah, the speed is definitely problematic for me personally. And yeah, I'm trying whatever I can to waste time and slow down.
So you're desperately trying to slow down as well, Aleksandra?
Yes. So also, like when you have some plan, long-term plan, then you can make your own daily progress or make it normal. But here I got in a vicious circle where I'm just doing something without any long-term goal. Like what will I do in a year? So basically, I'm looking forward for semester finishing like a few weeks ago, and now having maybe more time to relax and to think about some maybe projects that need more research and to make something like thought through more.
Yeah, and I have the feeling that the NFT scene or like vibe is kind of now responsible for like living the January all the time. So January it's like the January of each year for a couple of years. It's kind of from the creative coding scene, like 1 month of daily experimentation of like short, you know, like just doing what comes to your head and like freestyling and exploring ideas fastly and not getting stuck to that. And I find that amazing. But usually I'm after 2 weeks done. Even though it should be, even should be longer.
But also sometimes it happens when I'm just sitting and thinking, not producing anything. It's not an effectively spent time. And when I'm just exploring something, working, then something comes up. So so I can't really not do anything. But I will try to slow down a bit.
Yeah, I'm not a coder, but January sounds or seems completely exhausting. So respect for doing that. Just a slight tangent. I wanted to ask you both about influence and how you take influence from other works that you've seen historically or with your peers within NFTs, perhaps. Do you primarily take influence aesthetically, or do you sort of see it as an algorithmic thing? Do you check out the algorithm first and see how beautiful or, well structured that is? How do you see influence?
Influence. Well, I can just speak for me personally that, I kind of learned and got into this. I don't know exactly whose artist in particular I've found out first, but it must have been like Frida Nake or Manfred Mohr, and this my fascination for algorithms and computers and digital world. I have the feeling I must have, seen it a little bit in these super simple pieces. Simple and I guess many of them are graphically simple, but you kind of have an idea that there's a system behind, and this is, on the one hand, interesting to look at it. There is something behind that is, that's where the kind of the message also is coming from the artist. But also I was just aesthetically, this is kind of what I really found interesting. And yeah, like I mentioned, I'm kind of going back in this direction to kind of put myself in the position of having the conditions of the 70s or something like that. Yeah.
For me, I'm a maker. Like I like to make things. Since childhood. When you get a new pen and you tend to open it to see how it works, or you want to destroy something just to see what's inside. So I'm influenced by artists from the 70s, but geometric art, op art, minimalism, stuff like that on a visual level. But also I'm also a huge fan of Manfred Mohr, because how it's made, can I try to recreate it? And I'm never making a recreation of someone's, but I start with trying to figure out what's the simplest algorithm behind it, and then eventually develop something completely different from that basic algorithm. Because in fact, behind every piece, there is some simple algorithm, and when you find out about it, then you can develop something your own.
So when you're seeing a piece on FX Hash, for example, that someone else has created, do you think purely in terms of the system?
No. That's firstly I look at idea, visual stuff, but eventually I will think about it unconsciously how it's made. I guess a little bit you're always trying to reverse engineer what is seeing there. If it's kind of I mean, this is a craft aspect. I have the feeling FX Hash is a hard skill craft display also. I mean, obviously not only, but you can definitely learn a lot there when it comes to that, because you have also a lot of stuff in front of you and you can be sure that it's generative. Yeah.
Do you feel as generative artists the community is sort of expanded, or your contacts have kind of increased since the NFTs came about last year, the year before?
Well, I'm not sure. It feels like it expanded enormously, but I'm not sure that maybe we're in a bubble of generative art. So we know all the people here, but actually how many people are there? And so it's not like worldwide popularity and everyone knows what we're doing. but definitely NFTs helped expand like that knowledge that this field exists, and there are people doing actively in this field, and lots of people are inspired to start learning coding to do their own stuff with code.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of expanded, but also just I have the feeling for the most part also just brought people together. Whereas I don't think like many. Well, that might be a stretch, but I think it has not expanded the field that like all of a sudden there's like artists popping up. It's the same people before that. Now you have a little bit of awareness of that, and that is really, really great. Because before that is, I met again lots of people that you've come across in the last years before that, and it was like, oh wow, this is so amazing. Like I have so much respect for that, or like this person is doing absolutely fantastic stuff, and maybe you haven't heard about each other for some years. Time goes by, like you don't know, and like all of a sudden it's a little bit like a big reunion, and also like a big energy source for everybody, which I think is really, really great, and I think this is good, but at the same time, everything has a flip side, and this type of people are having pressure. And having also expectations, and it can also yield a lot of difficult feelings, and there's a lot of people trying to be successful and make it, and it's still a tough world, I guess.
I really like that idea of NFTs being a reunion of generative artists who have sort of been milling around on the internet for a while, but this has coalesced everything. NFTs are obviously fairly niche in a wider art world, but within that bubble, as you said, Aleksandra, there seems to be a huge explosion of popularity for collectors and just for generative art in general. It seems to have just really exploded, particularly with the launch of FX Hash last year. Do you think that this kind of expresses some kind of latent appreciation for generative art within the art world, or is it just a sort of some other factor influencing this big explosion of popularity for what you guys do?
But I'm not sure, because generative art is recognized by the institutions, by the museums. So we actually didn't have that problem in art world. So the democratization with the NFTs was in both ways, for new artists to try out in this field, and also for people to start to collect generative art or to get familiar with it in that way. So that's the only plus, and it's a huge plus.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that it's kind of like a little bit like a validation process or something. So the curation or the voting that is happening between the scene by collecting or like by price point, that this is like a little bit like an internal validation process. So it's not like say like an institution that is not living this type of stuff is valuing what is good or what is bad, if you want to make it simple, and like this, it's kind of like a democratic way of valuing and in a network, and I find that that is very special, and we're going to see how that's going to turn out. What I doubt that majority is going to agree with the success within that context, because in the end, it kind of, it's an individual thing still. It's not like there's no truth of the meaning or the impact of a piece of art. Yeah.
We've got a couple of minutes before we solicit any questions from the audience, if anyone has any. But I just wanted to give you just a big question at the end, perhaps. How do you see the future of generative art and the impacts of NFTs? How do you see it developing? Sorry.
Okay, so
Got 2 minutes.
I will just repeat one thing I said. Like, if we are in an exploring phase, then I hope to see less experiments. Like, I do something, and then I mint it in 5 minutes, and that's it. Just like let it ferment a bit, maybe develop, give some more story behind it, meaning, communicate something more, and I hope we go in that direction.
Yeah, well, I can't look in the future like any of us, but I have a little suspicion, I guess, that it could be like in a positive way, that it's turning generative art or generative artists into artists, because there has a little bit there was a different it's a different vibe. Like, it was for me also personally very difficult to identify as that, because you're not being taken serious when you are doing stuff on your computer in the past. And this, of course, it depends like what you're doing, but I have the feeling that this this credibility that is now attributed to artists is giving them the possibility to grow and do something that is leaving that space. And that's what I'm really looking forward to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And brilliant timing, by the way. Do we have any questions? I think we have a roving mic person. There we go.
Hello. Thanks, everyone. I have a question about generative art. First of all, I think it's really important to have links built between generative artists working now and generative artists of the past. That those links were not historically made, so I appreciate this kind of narrative, because these are buried histories which are emerging now, which is obviously very exciting. I mean, one of the interesting things about Tyler Hobbs is that whilst being very successful and very good, he also writes about his practice. And he says that the two key differences from earlier forms of generative art are, first, the script output goes directly into the hands of the collector with no opportunity for intervention or curation by the artist. Second, the generative algorithms are expected to create roughly 100 times more iterations than before. So in one sense, the autonomy and the agency of the artist has gone up, but in another fundamental sense, the role of the artist has sort of decentralized, it has dissolved, and there's much more power in the hands of the collector, I would argue, as an actor in the making of generative art. And so I wonder, how artists feel about that sort of, both the power but also the dissolving of that power in some sense.
Thank you. So, since I've been doing interactive art for most of my life, I love when I get input from the audience. So they need to interact with my piece to get some results. So here, also when collector gets the piece and in any other way interferes with the result, I see it as a huge plus, because I love this collaboration or interaction with the audience, no matter which media we're talking about. So it can also be something in real space, real interaction, physical interaction, or in this way, I think also collector or the owner of the piece gets more from that when he feels like he's also making this piece develop.
Well, I find this really interesting, actually, that now that what you said about interactive art, because I was also working with this quite a bit and was pretty disappointed by that, because usually audiences are passive and don't want to interact, and usually it's mostly maximum reaction, and this it's not enough if you want, interactive. So I'm actually thinking about this the first time now that when you look at it like that your audience or other artists are interacting on a social level with your pieces like that they have the full access to the backbone of it and can have, can repurpose it from that. Maybe that's the interactive essence.
Yeah, I also agree with you make an installation in a real space and you expect the audience to interact with it, and it never happens. But then I was developing pieces that were on internet, and I expect people to interact with them in a different way. So I was also doing some studies, observing them, how they interact with the piece when they're in their own environment, on their own computer, and it's completely different with the public space. So here we have something really similar because it's all in virtual space, in metaverse or somewhere. So people are interacting with that in their own environment without this pressure of public space.
Thanks for that question. It's a great question. We've only got time for a very brief one, so whoever's next, that'd be great. But also just a reminder that we're hanging around by the TezTalks booth most of the day. If you have any questions, then come and speak to the artist directly afterwards.
I think you were first, if you'd like to go. Thanks very much for coming out. Great to listen to you guys. I just have pragmatic question. I listened, or I Googled while you were talking, your upward spiral, Marcel. Looks very cool. I have a personal connection with that as well, as my dad used to make pens, and they used to use the technology to see how far they could draw before they run out. And you've used that kind of creative side to make something new. Pragmatic question, I saw on the secondary market, they have different royalties. Why is that? And does that maybe incentivize in the third or on the secondary market? How do you make or incentivize that person resends the physical? Because that's often the problem.
Yeah, thanks. I see two questions. Let's start at the end. Sending physical artworks on the secondary market. I don't really see a problem there. I'm expecting. I'm giving collectors freedom to do whatever they want. Yeah, it's out of my hand, and I feel that the respectful collectors that that I'm waiting for are living up to the expectations of doing that, and sending artworks around is not a very difficult thing to do, and I'm thinking it's gonna happen. Yeah. So that's one thing. And you're asking about the royalties. That's really funny because when I was in the beginning, I was making the drawings and minting them directly, kind of as a super fast iteration. That's when the Hiketnunk energy was also around. And later on, I just made these and kind of waited for good weather to take a picture, like in the wintertime, for example. And I batch minted them and just took random royalties. That's the difference, yeah. I mean, if it matters to the collector how much royalties there are, then there are some with low royalties and some with high royalties, so you can choose.
That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, today. But thank you for coming. Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, Aleksandra. And like I said, we'll be in the TezTalks booth most of the day. Thanks.